Hello, good morning. It is morning, early morning, 3 a.m. To some of us, it's the middle of the night. I've been sharing with you a work in progress. I've titled this episode, this chapter, 2020 Hindsight. And I have two objectives, and I'll mention them right up front. Number one is a preface to this body of work, this work in progress, this Zen with a smile. And the second objective is housekeeping. And I'll get into that at a later time. At first blush, this collection that I presented so far, episodes or chapters, could have seemed like, may have seemed like, random rambling. And upon reflection, which I'm very prone to do, I thought that 15 chapters in, might be a good time to have a preface, to look for cohesiveness in these apparent random ramblings, in the search of wholeness, which is a consuming passion of mine, the search for wholeness. So what these episodes, they're intended to be sort of short stories. I'm putting together, can look at it as a collection of short stories, in that they each are intended to stand alone. But in truth, they're part of a spiritual journal. It's a journal into self-inquiry, and self in the sense that is contained within me. It's example of spiritual inquiry. So I'm hoping as this progresses, as this work in progress continues, comes to fruition, it will become more obvious that what may be random ramblings, what may be self-contained collection of short stories, ideally it can be seen as a whole organic, the wholeness and the organic completeness. I've always thought that I felt obligated that I need to write books, but somehow sitting down to a computer or sitting down to old-fashioned pen and paper just didn't work for me. And then I had a little epiphany in 2018, the beginning of this year. I thought that this format, where I'm talking, telling, where you can see that it's kind of maybe a visual journal, a visual work, but anyway, the bottom line is that I feel good about it. I feel that maybe I'm onto something. And it's really intended to just be an expression of my personal takes, my personal experiences in this self-inquiry, spiritual inquiry, in a journal, a documentation. And in that documentation, it's my hopes that it will help you in your process. And it goes without saying that your process probably will be very different than mine. But maybe there's some commonalities, maybe there's some themes, maybe there's some things, some insights that might have value, that might resonate with you. It's kind of strange to be 14 episodes in and have a preface. But somehow, knowing me, it's very fitting. And I may suggest on Facebook that maybe the preface is where episode 15, chapter 15, the preface might be the place to begin. Maybe that you'll see that there's a cohesiveness, what may be, as I said, rambling and random, starts to take on a life of its own. Again, wholeness, unity, the constants that I see through my self-inquiry and spiritual inquiry, the constants that I see, the themes that I examine closely. So in this spirit, I want to try to assure you that there is a wholeness, there is a cohesiveness in this. In my journal. And again, I like the standalone nature that you consider that each episode, each chapter is intended to be viewed in any random order that you wanted, whatever title caught your attention or floated your boat. But those of you that, if there are any of you that stick with me through this work in progress, it'll be interesting to see where we come out at the other end. Because my plan has always been, there's no plan. Let something evolve. Let it grow. Let's see where it takes us. So that's the elements of preface that I wanted to share. So if this was a written novel, a written journal, the preface may be in the beginning. But because of this is a work in progress, because this is evolving as I breathe, as I live in the moment. So, enough said about preface. My main point is that I'm sharing a very personal journal of discovery, journal of intense, sometimes intense witnessing, intense participation, intense inner work, inquiry to life as we found it, as I find it. So, let's go into the second half of the purpose of this episode. Housekeeping. Now, what do I mean by housekeeping? Well, I've gone back, I've listened, I do go back and I do listen to each episode and each chapter and try to put it to the same intense scrutiny that I put to my inquiry, my spiritual inquiry, my inquiry that began with the self, comes from the self, and ultimately discards the self. Now, as I've shared before, the concept of linear time, a calendar and dates and a clock, I'm looking at a clock, it's now 3:11 a.m. But basically, linear time, measured time, is a man-made construct, a humankind construct, It's no more real than anything else that I'm seeing on the level of self, on the egoic level, in the world of Maya or illusion. So, linear time. It's convenient to measure it. It's convenient to put years and dates and time, a stamp. But ultimately, it's meaningless in the process. As I mentioned, and I will mention again, we only have the moment. But let's take a look at, let's take a moment to look at the moment. I mentioned before that everything that can be, will be, has been, and is known is available in this moment. So when you look at a moment, it's inclusive. Everything, the universe as it is available 24/7. It's always there. So the now, the moment, contains the future, contains the past, and is the present. So, housekeeping. If they always say that you can't go back. You can't go back for a redo, for another take. I've mentioned before that we're making a movie. If we're watching a movie, if we take our mind and we take what our senses show us, the Maya, the illusion, we start to see that none of it's real. But yet we have to engage. We have to engage with the Maya. We're part, as long as we're in this body, we're part of the Maya. We're part of the illusion. And one step farther, we have responsibility to fully participate in the illusion, while recognizing the non-reality, the unrealness of it. So, this concept of the moment being a culmination, being a representation, being everything, well, it allows hindsight, 2020 hindsight. We can go back and look at things because, I said once that tomorrow, where's yesterday? Yesterday's gone, tomorrow doesn't come, never comes. But in a sense, in the ultimate sense, it's always here. so that I live tomorrow, yesterday, today, is an example of linear time. It's an example of attempt to monitor, attempt to delegate, an attempt to confine time so it's more convenient. It's an easier concept for us to grasp. It's useful. The measurement of time is useful in our pursuit of life and our daily activities. Now, I'm using the analogy of watching a movie. I've said before that stilling my mind, quieting my mind, has been pretty much of an ordeal, and with very limited success. But what has been successful is recognizing that my mind wants to make noise, my mind wants to work, my mind is a fine instrument, and it does have some applications, it does have some uses in self-inquiry, spiritual inquiry. But for the most part, it's for entertainment purposes only. Suspension of disbelief. Watching or listening or being in a movie. And to take that analogy of movies one step farther, in a way, with our life, with our expression, we're making our own movie. And the wonderful thing about movies is that you can have another take. You know how they say, take one, take two, take three, take one. Instead of saying that's a mistake, you made a mistake. Let's retake. Let's revisit. Let's redo. Take a mulligan. Have another chance. So there's an element of this analogy that I find really useful. This means that I can look back on what I've created so far. I can revisit what I've done so far. These 14, soon to be 15 episodes. I have the luxury of going back and looking at it and dealing with it in the moment, which is now. Dealing with the moment. So, instead of in the spirit of take one, take two, and not in the spirit of mistakes. The first inconsistency I could see is about my spiritual guides. I'm very clear that Milefort, the court gesture that somersaults and talks non-stop. But in that non-stop talking are really gems. All the wisdom of the sutras, all the wisdom of accumulation of inquiry by billions of people is one of my spirit guides. Mila, that's Dhammo, I'm sorry. That's Dhammo. And he appears as a court gesture, somersaulting continually, and jabbering. And my other spirit guide is in the guise of Roger Bacon, considered he was a Franciscan monk, considered to be, by some, one of the fathers of science. He was into astrology because in his era, astrology was a science just as legitimate as any other science. But he also was some alchemist, a wizard with pointed hat. And in those days, it wasn't a conflict to be a monk. Well, maybe it was. To be a monk, a friend of the Franciscan order of the Catholic Church. to be a mystic, to be an astrologer, to be a scientist. He was particularly interested in optical. Did a lot of work in optical glasses. Okay? And in the guise that I experienced, Roger Bacon he's 8 feet tall at least, wears the robe of his order with the hood pulled so far forward that you see no facial features. It's just darkness. And I mentioned that he has no feet. He hovers about 2 feet off the ground. And he's silent. Never says a word. So look at this. Look at this. And I've mentioned the inconsistency was not in who and how I see these spirit guides, but whether they're on who's on the left and who's on the right. I'm not very good at right and left. Who's right and left? Is it my right, your left? Spatially, I'm a little bit challenged. Maybe slightly dyslexic. I don't know. Looking in the mirror and shaving, I had to train myself to be able to do these things. But what I want to say, the important thing is, they know. They know where they're supposed to be. They know whether they're on my right or my left. So I don't have to worry. But I did want to address an inconsistency, because I remember saying one was on the right, one was on the left. The next time I said, this one's on the left, this one's on the right. And inconsistencies are not tidy. That's why I'm calling this housekeeping. But the bottom line is they know where they're supposed to be. It's really not my responsibility. As a teacher, as a university professor, I never considered myself with seat assignments. I thought that was beyond the realm of my responsibility. I left it up to the students. And just like my 2 spirit guides, they knew where they're supposed to be. They knew where they wanted to be. They sat where they wanted. And pretty much, as human nature, claim a seat, come back to the same seat, and everything is in order without any effort on my part. So in that same spirit, pardon me if I was inconsistent, if you even noticed that. But I'm not worried. They know where they're supposed to be. Okay. Now I want to apologize. The biggest apology I have is my introduction. My introduction was really bad. I have a microphone now. I just started out blind. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm still like a work in progress. At least now I have a microphone, so I think the sound is improved. I've done something about lighting at the suggestion of my dear brother Matthew Lian. Said, side light, some drama instead of the flat face. Okay? So, I want to apologize for my first effort. It really fell flat. And then YouTube has some built-in editing. And I wasn't successful. I noticed that I put 2 segments together. So when I watched the introduction, I repeated the same set. What I wanted to cut out didn't cut out. One of the reasons I was editing is my first attempt. I had music playing, my meditation music. Oliver Shanti, in fact, was the artist that was playing. And as I recorded this, YouTube didn't like it very much. They said, what's it called? I had music that Copyright issue. There you go. It was a copyright issue. So I tried to edit out the ambient sound, the background sound. I thought it would give me, at the very beginning, I didn't even really, I've usually got music going. So it's ambient music, it's just to, and that was a problem. Copyright violation. It said in red letters, it mentioned the name, Oliver Shanti, and the song. But I was more worried about how terrible the sound was. I even named the episode Must Wear Headphones, because if you wanted to hear what I had to say, and this was supposed to be my introduction. So, at first, until I realized how bad it really was, at first I wanted to keep it because I wanted to document my evolution, so-called evolution, hoping that I would go from poor to passable at least, to watchable, to listenable. Well, the saddest thing for me was that it had a lot of hits. It had been watched by more people than all my other videos combined. So I probably guess that, I speculate that people watched the introduction and said, oh, that sucks. And I can't subject myself to any more of this. And I really couldn't blame you. Those of you that have suffered through that, maybe we're going somewhere together, hopefully. So I deleted that introduction. But I thought introduction was necessary, and there was some things, some elements, some background that I thought might help, might establish who I thought I was, where the ego had led me astray. So I redid the introduction, and all in all, I was pretty pleased with it, and I called it Introduction REDUX, from the Apocalypse Now was redone. So it was Apocalypse Now Redux. REDUX is redux. Like all my ducks in a row. Redux. When I use my introduction, redo, I thought, well, redux must be French, and it's probably redo. A little information is deadly sometimes. But I did find out that it's redux. But I used the title in the spirit that it was meant to be in a movie, in a video, that you have a redo, a retake, a chance to do it over again. Hopefully improving it. But I do owe you an explanation, because the information I gave you was, the pronunciation was not correct. So, introduction, redux. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a beautiful poem, Sanskrit. I think it's a Sanskrit Sermon on the Mount, or else it's but it's a very important, and it was influential in me. Over on my bookcase here, I still have a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, even though I haven't looked at it in many years. So I was able to go take it out. And I mentioned that I talked about the Hindu Trinity. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And in Christian we have Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And I was always a little confused. Holy Ghost, is it H-O-L-Y? Or is it H-O-L-E-Y? Or is it W-H-O-L-E? Why? Holy Ghost. Never quite clear. Sounds cool, I like ghosts. And a holy one, wow, what's not to like? But again, the point is a Trinity. So somehow there's this is West and East. Both have this commonality. And the idea that the idea of God, might have three different aspects, seems to have appealed or resonated with many different cultures in many different times. So there must be something to it. But anyway, the point is that I was talking about the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, on the eve of a battle, is talking with his charioteer, who's going to drive him into the battle. And he's talking about illusion, Maya. He's talking about responsibility. That even though we're in the illusion, in the Maya, as I mentioned earlier, we have a responsibility. We have to act. We have to participate. We have to play our role in this drama, in our movie. But I mentioned Arjuna was talking, his charioteer was Vishnu. And something drove me to pick up the book and look, because this was spontaneous. This is information that I needed to know when I needed to know it, and it was available to me. But much to my chagrin, when I looked, it was Krishna, that the deity that Arjuna was conversing with on the eve of the battle. Krishna. And maybe the reason I didn't remember Krishna is because I have to admit to a little bit of baggage with Krishna. The Hare Krishnas did some damage in my life. I had some experience with being around Hare Krishnas and didn't really appreciate much of what I saw going on. Although I have to say that that's judgmental, and I wasn't really ever a part of it, and I don't really know. I'm just sharing that I had a prejudice, I prejudged. But when I started finding out about Krishna, I found that they call him the 8th avatar of Vishnu. Avatar is, as near as I can figure, it's something close like a reincarnation. So when I said Vishnu, actually you look at the word, and it's Krishna. But Krishna is an aspect of Vishnu. So maybe you can forgive my lack of detail, my mistake, and give me a redo. Give me a chance to do it over. Take 1, take 2, take 3. I like that, And actually, I believe in life that we probably can have this same liberty or freedom to take a mulligan, to take a redo, to take another take, and dismiss the mistake. Dismiss the concept of mistake. And the other thing I had to address was that on, I believe February 6th, around midnight, we experienced a series of earthquakes here in Haiwan. And one of them shook everything. Everything that was standing was on the ground. Quite a shaker. Fortunately, it didn't last long. It was only about 20 seconds, although that 20 seconds seemed long. And we continued to go through the series of quakes. So on, I believe, February 7th or February 8th, probably February 8th, I did a video, the first video that I did post-earthquake. And my wife, who I love dearly and who I respect her constructive criticism, told me that she thought I laughed too much. She said, maybe people won't take you seriously because you're always laughing. You laugh so much. And I took a look at that video, and she was right. She was right. I laughed a lot. Was it too much? I don't know, but let me explain. Let me try to justify my laughter. My laughter and the insight that I have from this experience, first of all, really appreciating constructive criticism. I've never been real happy with criticism, honestly. But in the spirit of constructive, with 20/20 hindsight, at first I don't like it, and I respond. I try to bite my tongue, but the feeling is that I'm being attacked, and the ego doesn't like that. But what I wanted to share, the reason I mentioned it to you, is that I realized something. I had a little epiphany. I had a little insight to my personality. And I laughed in an attempt to manage stress. And, there's a lot of ways to manage stress, and I really think that laughter might not be such a horrible way of attempting to manage stress. And what was the source of stress? I have to relate a little person. I was laying on the bed the whole time the earthquakes were going on. I just laid in bed. I didn't get up, I didn't run, I didn't hide, I didn't try to get under the table in the doorway. Meanwhile, my wife was holding on for dear life, both sides of the door, because she had heard that there's some safety under a doorway. And our kitty, who was on the bed, our kitty, God knows where he was. He just freaked and he just was gone. And in the darkest, safest, smallest place he could probably find. It took us a couple hours to finally find him and try to reassure him because he was cowering. Imagine from an animal's point of view. We don't, as humans, we don't really understand earthquakes. And we're awed by the power of nature. And a kitty. So, my stress. And here's the personal story part. My wife looked at me and she said, "You look like you're just waiting to die." And I thought, that's such a really funny comment. Because the truth was, in the moment, I was not ready to die, but accepting that if death was coming, because I learned that since it's eternal, that it's only an illusion, that death is only an illusion. So I'm pretty good in crises. I don't panic in crises. I didn't panic. I wasn't afraid because I have experienced the fearlessness that comes from seeing the truth. But my source of stress, My source of anxiety was for our kitty and my wife. They suffered a lot. And I'm empathized. And I felt a little helpless because I have a responsibility to them that I couldn't fulfill. That's how I felt. So, laughter for me can be a defense. So, that's my housekeeping. There'll probably be more. In fact, if anything's certain, you could probably count on more. I can count on more. But I'm hoping that those of you that are on this journey with me, my journey of self-discovery, my journey of spiritual inquiry, might find something useful, some nugget that you can identify with, but must stress that all of us are unique in our abilities to quantify, to qualify experiences that happen to us. They're kind of beyond the realm. We're limited to the tools that we have at our disposal. So again, thank you for this redux. Thank you for this mulligan. Thank you for, even though I took it. I didn't ask you for it. I took it in the hope of seeing that there's a continuity to what might appear to be random ramblings. My chapters, my episodes, my standalone short story, inclusive in the wholeness, cohesiveness. So, welcome to my experiment, and I hope that we can continue